taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
Most of us blacks, or Negroes as he called us, really thought we were free without being aware that in our subconscious, all those chains we thought had been struck off were still there. And there were many ways where what really motivated us was our desire to be loved by the white man. Malcolm meant to lance that sense of inferiority. He knew it would be painful. He knew that people could kill you because of it, but he dared to take that risk.
He was saying something over and above that of any other leader of that day. While the other leaders were begging for entry into the house of their oppressor, he was telling you to build your own house.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. Today's guest, Professor or Dr. Leonard Jeffries. He's en route, and Graham's stuck in the 59th Street station. But as soon as they come, we'll begin with that conversation. But meanwhile, we're going to start something that everyone's aware of. The Missouri Ferguson is about to blow up, and it's all about breathing while black. We have an episode that we ran a couple of times, but to prepare you for what's happened in the past. And as Ferguson, you know, we all know what's going to happen. The cop is not going to be indicted, and we'll find out what happens when that happens. All right, just run a few minutes of breathing while black while we get Graham on the set. We'll come right back at you. Just run a minute or two of that, and we'll be right back. All right? Thank you. Breathing while black.
Free, without being aware that in our
His name is Trayvon Martin, 17-year-old Florida high school student, looking forward to visiting with his father and watching a basketball game on February 26th. But someone else would soon see him in a different, deadly way. As he walks through the gated community where his dad lives, volunteer neighborhood watchman George Zimmerman spots him and begins to follow. Minutes later,
What is your number? First gunshot.
Trayvon Martin is dead. The shooter, Zimmerman, who is white, claims self-defense and is not initially arrested by police, but the black teenager was carrying a can of iced tea and a bag of candy.
That was murder!
Tragically, he is not the only to die at the hands of a white American. In fact, he is among dozens of men gunned down or killed by a person in law enforcement, someone taking the law into their own hands, or breaking the law. What may seem surprising, these egregious acts are on the rise since the election of America's first black president. Some people believe the United States is now in a post-racial society. But millions of African-American men live their lives wondering if they could end up like a Trayvon Martin or hundreds of others who are unarmed but nevertheless shot and killed by police. I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey. On this week's edition of In Focus, we look at a number of cases that highlight this crisis in America, where men of color, and sometimes women, are put in someone's sights and targeted simply for breathing while black.
Welcome back to the show. All right, we have Professor Leonard Jeffries here today. What do you think about that? Breathing while black. I'm sure you spent many years in that position, and as you see, it's going hog wild today. And this Missouri thing's about to blow up.
Well,
You see
it looks
the
like they're setting it up for
yeah,
a blow-up.
you know that,
They're really actually almost saying, look, it's going to happen, so we're going to be prepared.
right?
Even a peaceful demonstration could turn into a disaster.
Anyway,
They've already set the stage. I don't think it's a question of breathing while black. It's a question of thinking while black. And so we're talking about weapons of mass destruction. And if a black man and black woman has a thinking mind, that's a weapons of mass destruction. It will destroy this culture of negativity that has devastated our So the important thing is the mind, not the behind now. You know, so a lot of young people go out and show the world their behind when they should be showing the world their mind. Oh. It may not be on.
when you're live from Manhattan Neighborhood Network, as you see. All right, let's try that again.
Is the mic outside or inside? It's
Well,
outside.
Let's go to Leonard Jeffries' role in. Do you have that set up? And we'll come right back on you while we test the mics. All right? We'll come right back at you. I want to show you an interview that you did with, forgotten his name, but we'll see it. You have that, you know that one?
Nothingness was enslavement, but now we are coming back. And so they have to see our role. Obama is the president of the United States who happens to be black. Anybody running to be the black president of the United States is not black.
What about Al Sharpton, which you run also?
All of those were attempts that could not possibly win. But they were attempts to get leverage in the political system for black people. My last breath, I'm not looking for him to inspire me to do what I'm doing.
Nice.
Shirley Chisholm ran. I sponsored a fundraiser for her at our place in San Jose when we were out at San Jose setting up the Black Studies Department. But it was a statement to the world about the power of black women. It was not a real attempt to win. My buddy Dick Gregory, he wrote on my picture, our first Negro president. Wow. So that has been in my consciousness ever since I've been around. And I knew that it would take a special circumstance to allow that to happen, and so we had the special circumstance. It would take a special person. A black nationalist couldn't do it. Someone who had clear statements of what has happened to us could do it. And so Obama comes as the special person, coming out of the womb of a white woman, being raised by white grandparents, traveling around the world, being in the cultures of Haiti, cultures of Hawaii, and the cultures of Indonesia, gave him a global sense of self. His greatest decision was to marry a strong, powerful black woman. Christian graduated from Harvard, and that was the right decision, I feel like, in terms of his development.
Wow.
Our young people betrayed the contributions made by others to move us this far along. Our fault because we haven't put in the formation that they needed to become. Seriously. It was a statement to the world. Pan-Africanist, young, a white fellow that I grew up with, Anthony Siraco, in Newark, New Jersey. And when I graduated from no president creates it. They're just a part of it. They can maneuver and manipulate it, but that system isn't. And the system that we have is a system of white supremacy domination. And we've got to continue to struggle to break and to establish our own. I'm just going to do it even more now that he's there.
Wow.
Amazing.
Yes. Well, one thing about Dr. Jeffries and the Dr. Clarks and the Dr. Benz, we're long distance runners. You can catch us at 66 or 67 at the Black Power Conference, or 72 at Gary, or you may catch us in the Nile Valley in 87, or in Haiti last year. So
I have a couple more in the back. Stand by. But that's amazing. I mean, what was so powerful about that, which I thoroughly agree with, the best decision he ever made was to marry a strong black woman.
That's right.
Michelle
I'm
Obama.
speaking from experience.
Of course.
I married a strong, beautiful, petite Harlem flower,
And
Rosalind Robinson.
did you get that video I sent of her at convent? Did she get that video?
I think she may have. But what I'm saying is that although I have this enormous track record, and I'm very proud of it, I could not have done any of these things without a strong black woman by my side. Yeah. And to this day, that's what we're going to celebrate on Saturday, November 23rd, the legacy.
I'll be there.
The legacy of our people. And
50 years.
And it's 50 plus years, and we hope to lay down the foundation for what the next 50 will be.
Amen.
You know, because you've got to pass that on to the generations that are coming. You can't expect them to understand legacy. That's why we want to revisit the legacy of Alambe Breath, the legacy of Malcolm, the legacy of Dr. Betty Shabazz, the legacy of Ruby and Ozzy. You know, the legacy of G2AOC. He cannot just come through here and having done what he did, and then he's passed on, and nobody is holding up the legacy. Dr. Clark had a partner. And it's interesting, he graduated from City College. Dr. Vincent Harding. Right. But we associate him with King. We associate him with the Institute of Black World. We don't associate him with City College.
Right.
And working with Dr. Clark, and they had what they call a morning semester. 6 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning. In the 60s, they were teaching the history that we're now trying to continue to teach. I mean, that's why we have to understand what this legacy has been and how it has been such an important historical moment for us, these 50 years, 60 years, you know, that have had the Malcolms and the Kings and the Betty Shabazz and the others, Pastor Ruby and Ozzy. G2, and so somebody has to carry that on. So G2's family has to carry it on. Malcolm's family has to carry it on. And so I'm going to set a process that will help our people carry on these legacies, refine them, make them available on this electronic process of information dissemination.
Right. You as an elder, I'd just like to hear from you, what's the importance of having a black president, or Barack Obama with a strong black woman behind him? I refer to it as a blessing from God. I mean, for me anyway.
Right.
My experience is I always prayed all my life to see a black man in that position that was, you know, as liberal, and I mean, he's just my perfect interpretation of what a black president should be.
Well, he had a chance to step into the process of legacy.
Right. Okay.
The African-American, Afro-Caribbean legacy of struggle and the legacy of restoring our humanity and even elevating it. And so it could have been done if he had a white partner. Other great men have done it.
It could have been done?
It could, because you have, I don't want to name the names, but you have our artists, our educators, our this and that, who have done significant thing. One of the greatest of our scholars, one of the greatest Africans, person to walk the earth was someone called Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop out of Senegal. He gave us this enormous victory of our culture that Dr. Ben has been trying to let us understand in Dr. Clark. But he did have a white partner. I won't take away the greatness of his contribution because of that.
Okay.
You see? But I don't think he could have handled the trials and tribulations of the American presidency without a black woman to say, this is what it is, brother.
Right.
Sit down and relax. Kick off your shoes. You got your beautiful angels that I gave you. Yeah. You got a whole history that you have to be a part of. And so we have to understand what legacy means. When you can reference a Paul Robeson, when your times are difficult, when you can reference a Jackie Robinson, not as an athlete, but as a symbol of busting in the door and then letting the floodgates open. So you had the Campanellas, the Newcombs, the Larry Dobies, all of the rest of them, Monty Irvin, that followed, Elston Howard, who used to live around the corner from where I live. So we have to see legacy. Jackie wasn't in it for the money.
No.
You have ball players now that have made more money in a single season than black players, all of them collectively made in 20 years.
But has anybody ever had the sort of, the obnoxious lies told about them as President Obama?
Jackie
I saw something on the internet saying Michelle Obama was a man.
Yes.
Jackie Robinson went through the same thing.
Yes.
He had the threats against his life.
Yeah,
People
but-
throw a black cat out on the field.
we all been
and
through
he
that.
was
But we
also
all
as
been
an
through
army
that.
officer. He was
But
stripped
we've all
of. He
been
was
through
stripped
that.
of.
But we're talking
his
about the President
title.
of the United States of America.
Well, the big difference now, and I witnessed it because I experienced it in the 90s when the attack came at me, it became one of the biggest attacks in the history of the world on a professor. Why? Because you had the electronic process. You had connections and circumstances. Wherever I went, if I went to Rio de Janeiro, there it was. I went to Amsterdam, there it was. I went to Germany, there it was. In other words, so you have now an electronic process that can create a devastation. A person can't think without something. So we have to look at the times, do an analysis of the times and the circumstances.
But we all just went through, we saw what it's like to be breathing while black or thinking while black. But we got the President of the United States of America, supposedly symbolizing the democracy, one man, one vote. And you see these lying, conniving racists.
But go back to legacy. Go back
breathing
to
while black.
systems
But
analysis.
no matter where you put the position you're in, you're still a black man.
Well, and you have to see yourself as a threat. Black men get jobs, they get into the corporate structure, they think we made it. And they're a threat.
All the time.
They're a threat in many ways psychologically that they don't even understand. They're a threat being in the corporate structure with white women and white men. And the white men feeling that it is not fair to have these young black men in here. I can't compete with this. And so here's a guy who's got his position in the corporate structure, and all of a sudden he's sliding out and didn't understand what happened. I thought I was appreciated. I thought they understood my value. They didn't understand that being in the context with white women, he was a threat. Our great scholar, Dr. Francis Kurtz Relsing, talks about the threat that the black man physically represents. Michelle Obama represents that also. But on the flip side, she was proud to show her powerful arms that she had worked on.
And they're calling her a man?
But what they did not and could not deal with, although some of them knew, was that she had mastered the European mind. She graduated from Princeton, where the elite of their world was. She went on from Princeton, following her brother at Princeton. She went on to Harvard. She graduated from Harvard Law School before the president. It's not her arms that they need to be.
She's basically smarter than he is.
Well, I would say that she has a consciousness that's probably more expansive than he is, because her family root comes out of South Carolina. And that's why she had sense enough not to get a nanny coming in from Europe, but she had a sense enough to bring her mother into the White House to raise those angels.
Of course.
And now they're criticizing her for taking her mother to China when she went with the children, and they're saying that we need to know how much did that cost to take her mother. Here's her mother in the White House, sacrificing her life to be a part of this legacy of a black family in the White House.
What about how black people treat the president?
Well, ignorance is bliss. There's many of us who are programmed, and we don't like ourselves. We look in the mirror, we say, oh my God, if I could just, the Michael Jackson syndrome. Looking in the mirror and changing. A beautiful full nose, full lips, beautiful melanized color, curly, tight, curled hair. And because he had been raised without that family hands-on, and he had been raised in this whole prostitution of exploitation and entertainment, he didn't have a self-image. So once he got the resources to be able to change that, he wanted a nose that he imaged as, he wanted hair, he wanted color. I mean, we need to study Michael. He are brilliant.
Yeah.
That family is one of the most talented families in the world.
Yeah.
But what could they have done if they had a real African socialization, African acculturation, appreciation of self, understanding who we are as the parent people of the world, who we are as the chosen people? What could that creative genius out of that family have if they had a foundation of based upon truth? But we are formed on lies of democracy.
Yeah,
This nation wasn't founded on democracy.
Right.
The nation was founded on slavocracy.
Yeah.
Every one of the founding fathers were slave owners, and I felt bad about that because I used to say at least one wasn't, Ben Franklin. But then come to find out that Uncle Ben had a man slave in the house and 4 to 8 Africans working his printing operation as enslaved peoples. So the nation was founded not on freedom, it was founded on slavery. It was not founded on justice, it was founded on injustice. The Native American land, the genocide of the Native American is the reality of the founding of this nation. So freedom, justice, and equality, certainly the nation wasn't founded on equality. Even the democracy, so-called, that was set up was a weighted democracy in favor of the people who owned slaves in the Constitution.
Right.
Third article of the Constitution. This nation was founded giving a weighted vote to the enslavers. And that's the tragedy, because even Jesse Jackson, I keep telling Jesse, stop saying we were 3/5 of men. We were no fifths in the context of this nation. The 3/5 clause was put into the Constitution to give a weighted vote for those people who owned other people.
Right.
It's an indictment. The nation was founded on contradiction, and we haven't been able to decipher it and say, wait a minute, all these celebrations about freedom and justice and democracy, it's a sham. A person like Frederick Douglass understood it. So he said, 4th of July? Why should I celebrate the 4th of July? What is the 4th of July to me? It's a sham.
Or Thanksgiving coming up.
That's right. Our Native American background, and many of us have Native American, but we should be revolting at the fact that they are still not acknowledging that this is stolen land.
Yeah.
You know. And so
they dumped all the prisons and send the prisoners over here in the late 1600s, and the prostitutes.
That's true. That's a whole history of
disease,
diseases coming over with syphilis and all that other stuff.
But anyway, in spite of all this that has been arrayed against us, we have struggled to restore our humanity, and that's one of the greatest stories that has not been told. And so that's what we should be understanding. Systems analysis allows us to understand that this was a system of domination, destruction, and death, and the maintenance of white supremacy. And Obama wasn't elected by the white system to elevate Africanists. Africanists has come as a result of the flow of history. He's a part of the established system.
How do you feel about people saying he hasn't done enough for black people?
Well, they say I hadn't done enough. Say Malcolm didn't do enough.
Yeah, they always say that about people when they're alive. Oh, that's right. Martin, that's right.
Martin didn't do enough.
Right?
He has moved. Right? He moved the South, which was unmovable.
Martin when he was alive.
He was just a civil rights leader.
At the Million Man March, I remember Minister Farrakhan. He said, "Don't complain about what the white man is doing over and against black people." He said, "The question is, what are you doing?"
That's right.
What any adversarial entity does is what they're supposed to do. But what are you doing to offset or to counterbalance the negativity that's going on? And that's the critical question. We're in there is somewhat of a paradigm shift. I was in the Gambia prior to the election in 2008. And Yahya Jammeh and others had said to me, well, you know, this is great that we're seeing a black man. I was in Belgium, and the people in Belgium said, we can't wait for you all to get rid of George Bush. And these were white Belgians.
Right.
They said, because he's wrecking the entire economy of the world. But I was shocked to hear people in Belgium saying to me, we hope that Obama is elected president. Because I was hearing it in Africa, and I was hearing it in Europe. So the world was looking at this as a major paradigm shift.
Well, they thought that perchance that democracy would work, because they thought that this was a chance for America to show its real shining star. Here's a black man can become president. But as soon as he tried to do something right, see, that's when the cracker just came down. Well, the day he was inaugurated, that's when they started the mess.
Well, George Bush first, George Bush II, they represented so much of the arrogance of white folks.
Right.
And the super destruction that they had put in place. So there was a great hope that there would go to blackness and something positive will happen. And so, to be very frank, a lot of positive has happened.
Of course it has.
Can you imagine if the country had been led after the Bushes by someone called McLean and Palin? Can you imagine? So that so we need to understand when we say, well, this didn't happen, that didn't happen. The system is geared so as not to have it happen. We got out of it more than we thought we could from someone who was not raised African. See, we're fortunate he made the decision to move on the African side, but his white mother couldn't have instilled a sense of struggle in him that the black struggle would have begun. His grandfathers couldn't have put the strength of struggle that my grandfathers put in me. And I am what I am because my mother and my family conceived it and had a process in place before I was brought into the world. And then 2 years later, my brother said, not two, I followed you by 18 months. 18 months later, here comes another little Jeffries. And they conceived greatness for him. And so he followed this older brother and was... The brother relationship that we've had is a phenomenal thing. It needs to be studied. To have two brothers work together and then just sharing. And we were told, you're your brother's keeper. We didn't have to wait for a biblical passage. Our parents said, you're
People
your
say
brother's
those were
keeper.
different times when we were more family than we are now.
That's right. And we had a village concept that worked.
Really?
Harlem was a village.
Really?
Bed-Stuy was a village. Newark, New Jersey was
How
a
can we
series
get
of
that
villages.
today?
We've got to analyze what we missed, and that you cannot educate and socialize your people through the electronic media. Hands-on.
People hide behind electronics.
Hands-on.
That's it.
Love.
That's right.
Francis Chris Welsing said you need lap time. In other words, you've got time on your grandfather's lap, your father, your mother, your auntie's lap. The lap time is gone now. Give them some instruments to play with, etc.
They hide behind they don't even get on the telephone. You can't even feel the energy over the voice.
Yes, so that's what we need to look at for our own purposes and not for the purposes of trying to be white folks in America.
Right.
We need to be Africans, humans. And so I'm optimistic.
How far gone are we?
No, look.
Is the psychosis really...
If you understand legacy, on my father's side, his father was born in 1868.
Give us your age.
And I'm 77. We're pushing on 78. So I'm catching up to Dr. Ben.
Right.
He's 96.
Right.
But what I'm trying to say is that my grandfather was born in 1868 at the time of chaos and confusion, the end of the Civil War, the rise of the Klan, the destruction of black folk, the attempt to continue the dehumanization of oppression. And in spite of that, him and his brother, his older brother Sam, who was born in 1865, and then eventually our grandmother was born in 1870. So you're talking about the 13th Amendment, 1865, the 14th Amendment, 1868, and the vote, the 15th Amendment, My grandparents and granduncle never got that stuff. But they still were able to structure families, take land, build their institution, their churches, their school. The schoolhouse that they built is still down there in Georgia. And generations came out of that. They didn't wait for white folks to map out. They worked their land. That land is still there. And out of it came the Browners, the Maddocks, the Jeffries. So when my grandfather had his 50-year period, he had 13 to 14 kids. My father was the last one. His brother Sam had 15. But the Klan murdered him in 1917, the birth of the new Klan. He was born at the birth of the old original Klan. He survived, and the family put strength in him and his brother and the others around him. He was the head of the... When I found his tomb, I was working with Alex Haley on Roots, and we were filming in Georgia. And then white folks told me, we're glad you're here, Dr. Jeffries. We want you to know that we bought the rights to the book Roots. We're under no obligation to maintain the integrity of the book, and we certainly don't have to deal with the truth of African history. Here I am using my expertise.
Wait a minute.
Most people, I can't say it without tears. So the tears will flow. I can't say it without tears. In 1976, when they were filming Roots, I had been working with Alex Haley since 1971. I had a $500,000 grant to support Roots. So I went to Giuffre in the Gambia with him, et cetera, and all. I'm saying he asked me to come down for the filming of Roots, and I was there for 10 days, 2 weeks, helping things out. I got there too late to change O.J. Simpleton, O.J. Simpson. He was in the can already. He was a leader of the youth. And a Muslim leader of the youth would not have jewelry around his head, jewelry around his ears, jewelry around his neck. So I would have said, no, that has to be changed. But other things I did change. And finally, after a while, Margolis, the head of the process, Green from England, the head of the enslavement scenes, they told me, Dr. Jeffries, we're glad you're here. But we want you to know we bought the rights to the book Roots. We have no obligation to maintain the integrity of the book, and we certainly don't have to deal with the truth of the history. I was thrown off my psychic center at that point in Georgia. And so I couldn't fall back on no PhD from Columbia, no master's from Columbia, no studying in Europe, in French, honors graduate Lafayette College, graduate of Barringer High School, president of the grammar school. None of that could I fall back on. I was devastated. And then Spirit said, you're in Georgia, go to your grandfather's grave. I said, what grandfather? I don't know anything about a grandfather in Georgia, so I called Aunt Bessie up in Newark, New Jersey. I said, Aunt Bessie, tell us where we're from. She said, we're from Ohio. I said, Aunt Bessie, ain't nobody from Ohio. We come up out of Georgia. Where? She got my drift, and finally she said, your grandfather is buried in Midway Church Cemetery, Jasper County, Kelly, Georgia, near Monticello. I went to the Georgia archives, and there he was on the written page coming out of the census data. And someone I had never heard of, never talked about, never saw any pictures of. Here he was. I was going to him. So I told Alex I had to leave. I didn't tell him why. I was going to my grandfather's grave, and I went. And I discovered the grave. For the first time I went to rural Georgia. I rented a car in Atlanta, drove down to Monticello, found the church that they built, the school that they built. And his gravestone was the tallest one in the cemetery. It was an obelisk. It was a Tekken, the symbol of resurrection and rebirth, the two pillars of masonry on the side, his vital statistic. Jesse Jeffries, born 1868. August the 10th, in the same week, 10 years later that Marcus Garvey was born, died July the 14th, 1917. I later learned that he was murdered by the Klan, but he had 50 years. And he did his thing for the 50 years, and luckily he stayed the course to have me, because I would not be if my father, if he had not had the last child. So here I am. I was restored. Once I was in that cemetery with an ancestor I had never even heard of, never saw a picture of. It was never even talked about in the family.
Wow.
He was a leader of the community. He wasn't looking at white women. He wasn't winking at nobody. He was a leader of the community. They burned down the Masonic Lodge, and then at some point they murdered him.
Now, he was a Mason.
He was the head of the Masonic Lodge.
In what year?
Well, it would have been in the first 15 years of the 19th century. In other words, he died in 1917. So he was an adult male, a leader of the community. The schoolhouse that they built is still there. We know who did the masonry, what member of the family. This is a fantastic story.
But Masons are usually protected, aren't they?
Yes, but if you have the insanity of the Masonry rising again, the Klan after the Birth of the Nation movie, that's why it was such a hurting for me. The Birth of the Nation movie had the Klan rising in Indiana, rising in New Jersey. And so this insane Klan trying to put black folk back into their place.
Talk about that for a second. Most people don't understand what we're talking about. There's a movie out. Explain the movie.
W.D. Griffith.
W.D. Griffith.
All right.
It was the most widely viewed piece of cinematic production at that time.
1915.
It was horrific for blacks to see. It ingratiated white people to the nth degree. And you've got to remember, we rose in prominence following the Civil War.
Yes.
Right.
You know, we speak about having a black president. We had black governors.
Right.
We had black
Congressmen.
senators, congressmen. We
That's
had
right.
them.
1865.
Yes.
So when the Klan rose up to suppress any progress of the Negro, not only in the South, but in the North.
Right.
The Klan was in New York.
New Jersey.
The Klan,
New Jersey.
right in Valley Stream,
They're
right
still in New
across
Jersey,
the
right?
county
Yes,
line
that's right. That's right.
from Queens. The Klan, had, as recently as the last 15, 20 years.
Right.
A friend of mine who's a state trooper pulled over a truck, and it was 2 Klansmen
Yeah.
in the truck right there in Valley Stream.
Yeah, upstate New York, all over the
So,
place.
you know, we don't have to go to the deep South
Right.
to find the evils of racism. Racism is
Right.
everywhere, ever present.
And it's systematized. That's the devastation. It is a system, and the system knows how to rework itself. Even when it's at a low point, it can regenerate itself, and that's
Well,
why.
don't we see it in the
But you need
Republican
a system to deal with a system. That's our mistake. We have to organize a system. Our economics, our politics, our culture has to put together to give us system capability. Then we can resist the systemic effects of our exploitation, and we can build seriously for our future.
Well, how do we do that since we fight amongst each other
we had
so
talked
much?
about, well, the Birth of the Nation movie and the Willie Lynch syndrome helps to explain.
Yeah.
Whoever controls the images controls the self-esteem,
Now
the
you
self-respect,
explain
and
the
the
Willie Lynch
self-development.
Stress Welsing.
That's
Let's
right.
go over the Willie Lynch syndrome.
Right. And what our brother was saying was that this was the biggest movie phenomena in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it? It was the Klansman book
Right.
that D.W.
Exactly.
Griffith he took and put in all of these techniques that made it so sensational that the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, was
Right.
saying, watching
Staunch
us
racist.
in the White House talking about this is like writing history with lightning. The destruction of the black success out of slavery, of the black leadership, blacks putting together a constitution that gave rights to poor people, including
Right,
whites, blacks
right,
establishing public education system. So that's why we need to have a real understanding of the history, and we can see it coming back again at different individuals. There'll be success, and we'll think we've arrived, and then here comes the system again to smash us. Control of images. And to this day, I can't forgive Hollywood for creating the Sambo images and all of those
Oh,
images
yeah.
that we grew up
Oh,
with.
yeah.
My instinct was to reverse them. And so my brother and I, we go to the movies. He was my younger brother, I was the big brother. So the Native Americans would get killed at every occasion. I would go back into our backyard and I would reverse it. I would have myself as the Native American, I'd have my tomahawks and my bow and arrow, and I would tie him to the tree, and he would have the visited, now here's the 10-year-old kids now. He loved me, so he let me act that out. So we have to understand the significance of images. But my mother had always, and my father and grandfather all had always said that you're going to be somebody. Your brother's going to be somebody. And here it is, my younger brother, his son is the congressman in Brooklyn, Queens now. His youngest son is the professor in Ohio. And here I am.
He's my congressman.
Oh, okay. Yes, and we're so proud of all of these young people that came out of the struggle. And it's not just a Jeffries thing. Of the 100 kids I grew up in Newark, New Jersey, 90 of us made it, men and women. That's the village. That's the story we have to tell.
But black people, again, were different back then.
No, it's the same people, but the system was different then.
But the
system,
village was different.
The system had collapsed in World War I.
Okay.
It was trying to put itself together. The system of white development was trying to put itself together for 10 years. They call it the Roaring 20s. And then it collapsed at the end of the 20s into a depression. And then it went into World War II. So you had the insanity of white-on-white crime, tens of millions of white folk being killed and gassed and put into, not just the Jewish people, that World War I was, they were fighting with gas, but you being the field. So we have to see the insanity of the white situation. Now, at the end of the war, you come into the prosperity because America was the engine for the world, because a lot of the world had been, and so we got this enormous prosperity in the late 40s and 50s and went and into the 60s. But then it flipped again. Other nations were emerging, and Vietnam, and et cetera.
The Saudis and the oil.
Oil. And so the system said we're going to be pushed back down again. But, you know, our thing has always been we're pushed down, we're going to rise. So the system analysis gives us the key, but the control of our power has to do with the mind, the images, You see?
You think we had our most freedom, I mean, from the early 60s or mid-60s to 70s? Because at the end of the 70s, you know, when the Republicans took over and Reaganomics came in, that was almost, they shut us down. They threw crack into Harlem and every place else in the 80s, and then it was genocide all over again. I mean, we got kids walking around today with grandmothers that were crack babies, with a mental, mental deficiency of, they forgot about the village. It's all hate each other, greed, selfishness.
Well,
you got rappers out here that used to be drug dealers.
Right.
Now they put them in Illuminati positions and making major bucks. And they help kill our race.
50 cents is now a corporate
They killed our race.
But we have to understand, we should not get caught up into the political game of Democrat, Republican.
No.
We need to have our own political dynamic so our interests are protected. And the most important interest to protect is economics. Every system has a foundation, and it's your productive, creative capability. That's economics. And in order for that economic, productive capability to benefit you, you have to have politics. Politics is your management capability. And so this foundation of economics and politics lays the basis for you moving somewhere. But the key is culture. Culture tells you what type of economics to have. You can have predator capitalism, or you can have a cooperative capitalism. And culture tells you who to do your politics with. You can either get in bed with the criminals that run our political operation, or you can try to come up with something new, or even improve the existing structure. So economics, politics, and culture is what we have to appreciate and understand, and what we have to link up. The existing white structure has two sides, the Democrat and Republican. It can be oppressive or it can be helpful. So I wouldn't want to say that the Democrats are always helpful, because you had the Southern Democrats who ran the Democratic Party.
Us from voting.
Adam Clayton Powell, as a single man, went into the Congress and reversed the process that had gone on for 100 years. We need to know the Adam story, the legacy of Adam Clayton Powell.
Well, we go past this last election. You watch how these the one running for Senator Grimes, where she wouldn't even own up to having voted for Obama. I mean, you see racism and just plain ignorance. And some of these Democrats talking about what progress and all the jobs they've gotten in the last 6 years. If without his struggle and positive input, we'd be where?
But could it be that the white elected officials who distanced themselves from Obama
because he's black,
but they knew how their people perceived blackness, and so they were dealing with the racism that we say he's been elected, there's no racism. It is even sharper now.
It got worse.
Yes,
of course it did.
But you know, I was at the inaugural, the first one, and it was something to see the masses of people, you know, on the mall and around the Washington Monument, down the Capitol. And I'm talking to my wife, and I said, every time they put President Obama's picture up on the screen, there was a hush. It was a hush. And the masses of white people that were there. And I had to think, I said, for white America to have gotten behind this man, there's a major paradigm shift there. Just in the popular vote, coming to the point where they would say, I think I'm going to go with this guy. I can see that he's black. I know that he's black. He's not white. But we're going to take him over and against Palin and McCain. And it said a lot with regard to the political dynamic and the people of this country. Because although we certainly wanted him to be president, there are not enough of us to bring that to pass. So it was a large number of non-black people who woke up. But you floored me with the thing about roots and the rights to the book. Did you ever find out what happened that would cause Alex Haley to sell was it financial?
Systems analysis will let us know that when Alex approached me, I first met him in fall of 1969, and that's not a part of the Jeffries resume. They think I became an individual in '72 when I came back to City College, but I set up one of the first Black Studies program on the West Coast in 1969, and So at that point, I met Ron Dellums. He was a councilman. At that point, I met Alex Haley. He was trying to work on this study of our family. I met Dick Gregory. And so from that point on, those brothers became a part of my life, etc. So Alex later came to me in '70 and said, I need some help on this project. And so I stepped in, and we got a grant from Carnegie Corporation to help Alex.
Okay.
But most people don't realize that Alex, at that juncture, was hiding his car off the streets of San Francisco so it wouldn't be repossessed, his convertible Mercedes.
Whoa.
He was living in the home of his secretary, Pat Alexander. Alex was in trouble financially, and so he needed help. And so most people see Roots as this enormous success that people put up money. No, he had to scrounge. And so when he came to me, we came up with the idea of a library of black family history in the tradition of discovering Kente, the roots of the Kente clan. And so people wanted to be a part of his success, so the Carnegie Corporation was able to arrange a $500,000 grant that I coordinated to help him do Roots. But it was done with a sleight of hand in the sense that he was paying, he couldn't pay the staff of people that was helping him. So many of the people that had helped him without pay were put on the Roots process we had. His secretary, Pat, who was not paid, became the secretary for the project. Bakari Sadie, who took him to the village of Jufaray, became one of our oral historians, legitimately providing material on what oral history is about. His brother, George Sims, who he grew up with, not his African brother, not a biological brother, George was put on the payroll because he had a real knowledge and he was a family history, etc. So I'm saying that to get Alex to the point where he could produce a manuscript that was worthy, there were other things in place. So when he signed the contract for either $50,000 or $100,000,
is that all?
Let's not even discuss it.
Well, that was a lot of money back then.
Yes, in 1960, 70 money, that was a lot.
Yeah, that was a lot of money.
But what we have to realize is that even members of his own family that were successful didn't support the idea of linking the family to Africa. Black people didn't support the idea of linking ourselves to Africa because we were successful in the 60s in trying to integrate and trying to be accepted.
Yeah, you remember those
And
days.
so that's Alex's phenomenon, was not just single-handedly, by his own grit, he was able to maintain that we're linked to Africa. And so that's the continuity that we need. We think we began in America as slaves when we go back to the beginning of humankind. So that village of Jufaray is a metaphor for the African village from which culture and civilization emerged. So that's what I want to be able to write about in the future, legacy on what this is. Alex died one of the poorest black men in history.
Is that right?
He was $2 million in debt. How many of us are allowed to get $2 million in debt?
$2 million.
Close your mouth. He died. He didn't have enough money for the 2 funerals he had.
Oh, wow.
Recently, just Sunday, Dr. Miles Monroe died in a plane crash while they were landing in Grand Bahama Island.
Okay.
And today I was watching a video and they said it was somewhat prophetic. And you're talking about legacy, which is where I am in my life regarding my grandchildren, and I'm thinking about them and what I'm doing to set up for them as they're growing. But Miles Monroe had a vision very recently, and he spoke about it on the news down in Grand Bahama Island. He said he dreamt of a runner, a famous runner who had died, no name, just a runner that had died, and he's holding a baton. In the casket, there's a baton. And a young man comes to the casket and pries the baton loose from the deceased runner. Now, the deceased runner was an older gentleman, but this is a fresh young man. He said, and one of our problems is we don't pass the baton while we're alive. He said, we must pass the baton to our younger folks. It's not about holding on to what we have until we die, and no one has been trained or brought up or strengthened and prepared to take on that mantle, grab that baton, and run the next leg of the race.
Now that's the most important thing that's been said tonight. And that's what you've got to build on. In other words, we got to appreciate the struggle and legacy that got us this far, and then we have to have processes in place that it doesn't happen by happenstance, it happens because of the culture. Africans did not pass on legacy by happenstance. They had a tradition of values transmission from before the womb till after the tomb. Before the women had children, they were being trained for the possibility of children. And when the women had children, they knew it wasn't just their child, it was the child of a clan. They knew that when they married, that the father was not the only person being involved in the child. If the father had 7 sisters and 7 brothers, those 7 sisters and brothers were part of the uncles, and so you had this extended family. It takes a whole village. The whole village concept was laid out in your family. We've gotten to the nuclear family. We've gotten to this process where a family is a woman and 3 kids waiting for a welfare check. That's survival. That's not a developmental institution. That's a survival institution. So what our brother was saying was that we have missed the boat in trying to imitate white folks' success without having cultural institutions where we can control the development of our people, we can control how they grow and the support that they get. So that's why my wife and I have decided that in dealing with our 50 years, we need to talk about legacy. And how do we maintain these legacies? How do you take a legacy of an Adam Clayton Powell and show a brother who had more legislative success than anybody in the history of the Congress, and he is now captured as a pretty boy who had women loving him, and not the real work that he did. Yes, and had his mint julep. So we've got to project the legacy in the way we project. We need to project it. That's passing that baton on. You have to take Paul Robeson and not have him devastated by the U.S. because of he has communist and he was a progressive, and then have them work a little magic where they had Jackie make some statements. So you had Jackie Robinson posed against Roosevelt, Robeson, and they were really brothers in the same struggle and achieving. You know, Robeson's family has a deep history. His grandparents, it's not just a Robeson. Jackie's brother, Mac, coming up out of the South, going to Pasadena, California. Jackie's brother was number 2 in the race in the Olympics with Jesse. Yes, with Jesse. So Owens. So we need to understand that Jackie comes out of a family of strong people, mother and the rest. That's why we have to capture, and then we have to put in place traditions of manhood development. And when you move into a leadership position, you have a ceremony acknowledging that, and then you put accountability in place. So that's one of the reasons why we want to take this year, every month, to do something significant to deal with legacy, passing that baton. Because I've seen Malcolm's children in confusion, Martin Luther King's children in confusion, Gil Noble's children in confusion. There's a measure of confusion in a family that I don't want to say now, but Dudley Thompson's, the great brother from Jamaica, one of our greatest people, family in confusion. So we need to have legacy where we can show these families what you need to do to appreciate the legacy, what you need to do to enhance it, what you need to do to pass it on, what you need to do to make sure it's protected. One of our brothers who's got he's a millionaire, a multi-millionaire, and I don't mind talking about him, Henry Louis Skip the Truth Gates. Who, if he came in this building, he'd give me a hug. Len, how are you doing? Really? How's Rosalind? But his thing is finding his white roots, and so he's trying to find the right roots of Malcolm, trying to find the white roots of Alex Haley's family.
Oh, is
And
he?
so his whole thing, if you analyze it, is to show, just as he did with Derek Jeter, it was terrible. Derek has a black father, white mother, and so he's from a mixed family, and so he traced his, Henry Louis Skipp Truthgate, traced his roots back, and there is a picture of a prominent black man holding a Bible in front of his church, and that was Derek's great-grandfather, I believe. But then Skip goes, he says, turn the page, and you'll be surprised, and he knows what they found. They found that the great-grandfather's father was the slave master. And then so he emphasized, and you know the land that he got came from the slave master. Do you know the this and that? And so if the slave master had produced a son that he had the decency to help, what about the other 100 Africans that he had on his plantation that he had in abject dehumanization? So we can't allow Henry Louis Skip the Truth Gates to get away with this. But we can't do it out of rashness or stupidity. We have to look and analyze. Yes, we have white roots in the various families of black folk. But what about the African line? How come Skip didn't follow the African line?
Which
further?
predates all lines.
That's right. And so
is it really again the money?
it's people who finance.
Right.
The Koch brothers just financed the loss of one of Hakeem Jeffries' colleagues who lost his Congress seat from the West Coast. Koch brothers went in with money for the last 2 weeks of the election and turned a black elected success into a defeat. Money. Skip Gates has been paid to twist the history upside down. Skip Gates has been paid to go into Nubia in the Sudan and go into the temples and the tombs of Tahaka and Shabaka, Pianke, who were Africans who revised the culture of Egypt for a last great walk in the sun in the 700s and 800s. And now Skip says, I'm looking at black pharaohs for the first time. Well, what about the pharaohs 500 years before in the New Kingdom? What about the pharaohs in the other parts of the history? What about the pharaohs that built the great Sphinx and the pyramids?
You know, we got 30 seconds left.
Well, you have to have us back.
We need to go. This
You
is
have to have us
part
back.
one of
Yes, this is a warm-up. We will be better prepared the next time.
Again,
It's a warm-up.
thank you for coming to the Gilchrist Experience, and Professor Jeffries, it's always a treat. Whenever you come, this is our true elder. And the God in me loves the God in you, and stay tuned to the Gilchrist Experience because we have more to talk about. Power to the people. Amen. God bless.